On today's episode of PNB, we're going to discuss that hidden fear that keeps many leaders from really fulfilling their true potential. And we're going to turn it around into a competitive advantage. On today's PNB, it's personal around imposter syndrome. So let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the PNB Nation, where it is all personal, not business. I'm your host, Mr. Rico, and I will be your guide through all things people and give you in-depth insights, strategies, and the secrets to behavioral dynamics to creating a common language for understanding people in and out of the workplace. So let's get started. Why imposter syndrome can't be a competitive advantage? It is a statement that I read from an article by Melody Wilding. Now, one of the main barriers that prevents leaders from reaching their full potential isn't missing the right skill set, nor is it experience or even training. The biggest roadblock is a lack of self-confidence. Take, for instance, or for example, a high-achieving new manager at a law firm. Graduated at the top of his class, and he was recently promoted as a new overseer of a team of 5 other young and upcoming attorneys. Now, despite his achievements and obvious aptitude, he's worried that he's not knowledgeable enough to lead effectively. There's also the accomplished executive who's had a hard time starting projects, especially when they are for a senior leadership team. Now, at the root of their procrastination problem is a concern that a tiny mistake will expose them as the fraud they believe themselves to be. So what's really going on here? Why are these high potential employees, obviously talented, obviously have the skill, obviously qualified, questioning their skill and ability to do the job that they have obviously earned? Now, these fears, if you've experienced them, if you're going through them, are the hallmarks of imposter syndrome. And it's a phenomenon where successful people doubt their own competence. Or, if we want to use today's new titles, workplace anxiety. Now, imposter syndrome is a term that has been used since the 1970s by researchers Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes to refer to a pattern of inadequacy observed among female graduate students. Now, despite the objective signs of success, these women reported feelings of intellectual phoniness, or I just lucked out, or I tricked someone into believing they were smart and qualified. Now, studies have found that 70% of people will report experiencing imposter syndrome at some point in their careers. It's almost like a rite of passage. But in today's fast-paced workplace, it's hard not to feel inadequate. At times, especially when there's a digital technology, social media, making it so easy for us to compare our success to others, or even set those false expectations just based on someone on Instagram. Now, imposter syndrome is not just for leaders or employees. As a matter of fact, it actually inflicts successful high net worth CEOs. In a survey conducted by Harvard Business Review, 116 successful CEOs were asked, "What are you really afraid of?" And they found that 63% were most afraid. And here in order, there is their biggest fear: being incompetent, appearing foolish, and above all, appearing too vulnerable. Imagine that, CEO not wanting to appear vulnerable. Now, the article went on to say that about 60% said that these 3 fears affected behaviors of not just themselves, but also their executive team. Although 95% said that the executive team members had a very limited view of their own fears. About 2/3 believe they had some self-awareness of those fears. And because of that awareness, those fears resulted in these dysfunctional behaviors. Now, see if you can relate to some of these. A lack of honest conversation amongst the team. Too much political game playing. What corporate industry is not having that? Silo thinking, all over the place. Lack of ownership and follow through, and above all, they tolerated bad behaviors. Now, when they were asked to think about the fallout from these dysfunctional behaviors, the executives mentioned more than 500 consequences from not addressing these behaviors. The ones most frequently mentioned by all of these CEOs were the poor decision making. They weren't able to make good decisions. They were more focusing on their own survival rather than growth, and inducing bad behavior at the next level down and failing to act unless there was a crisis. Have you experienced that? So how is this provide a competitive advantage? Well, it's on how you perceive it. It is a sign that those individuals are highly intelligent, driven individuals. The actions and thoughts have been artificially amped by a faulty set of assumptions and information. Now, the main issue is, how do you harness and fine-tune those emotions and retune the messages that are driving that negative action? Really, the entire core of imposter syndrome, as we look at it, is a lack of confidence in the role, the situation, or the environment. If you have not had personal experience in how to navigate that effectively, you may be looking at, how do I do this based on what I assume people want? And for those of you who are overachievers, you probably have more than one. So this is where brutal honesty with yourself as a leader begins to change from having this imposter syndrome as a hindrance and turning it into a superpower. So let's first identify which one do you resonate with the most. And by the way, as an organization, if you want a team of high performers, then this is a problem your organization is going to have to face and find a solution for. Now, imposter syndrome can manifest itself in individuals in the workplace as an inability to internalize achievements and downplaying accomplishments. I call that a person who's shy and humble. A fear of being found out or being exposed as inexperienced or untalented. I call that a perfectionist. Avoidance of feedback. That's a person who's just driven by unrealistic expectations. A reluctance to ask for help. That person that sees himself as self-reliant and a self-starter. Turning down new opportunities because they're an expert in what they know. Second-guessing decisions. Someone is cautious or just pessimistic. Overworking to the point of burnout to prove you are enough. That person just has high standards and is an overachiever. Or failing to start or finish a project. They're just a socialite, too busy socializing. All of these can have a positive spin. However, when pushed to an extreme and driven by negativity or even doubt, it's when it becomes toxic. So how do we squash imposter syndrome? You must first identify and look for evidence of your capability and feedback either from your team or peers. Remember, you were given this role for a reason. This will begin to provide you with where the blind spots you should start focusing that will create the quickest change. It is important to develop the skills in the areas you find the most difficult to do so, hence why we need outside input. So step one is identifying which of the imposter syndrome sounds like you. Once you do, you can start to transform them from a burden to a highly developed skill. The biggest reason we need to ID the type is because people who struggle with imposter syndrome have a very distorted, negative self-perception, which can affect their productivity and performance and the ability to change. Shining a bright spotlight on it eliminates the assumption we have of it and begin to see it for what it is. Now, as leaders, you can play an important role in normalizing these secret thoughts by bringing them out from a place of shame. Your courage can create a more positive, inclusive, and collaborative culture for your team because you are doing it, not just saying it. Remember, you are not the only one who may be struggling with this. If you have a high-performing team or a culture that thrives on competition or even comparison, or marked by poor communication and unclear expectations, or even worse, there's a lack of diversity and mentorship, which can reinforce that sense of isolation or others, then you most likely are going to have to deal with imposter syndrome. Many individuals in your team, if they fall within those three, are already struggling in silence of imposter syndrome, and it's affecting their confidence and their performance. As organizations and as leaders setting the example, your actions can curb the doubt and that lack of confidence. Now, this creates a level of trust when you do this that opens conversations, bonds teams together, increases productivity, lowers stress and anxiety, and here's where you deliver a massive competitive advantage because everyone is working together. Now, if you've ever experienced a top-tier military unit, you have seen this in action. Now, another key to identifying when potential imposter syndrome can occur is also an advantage to prepare you to turning it into an advantage. Now, insecurities of imposter syndrome pop up and respond to a couple of different things: new experiences, challenges. Say when someone is promoted or hits a major milestone or nails a big project, it's the unknown, the anxiety of those things that starts to build in that imposter syndrome and drive down confidence. Now, this only gets more intense as people rise to new levels of success. So as you promote, have a strategy to deal with this. In the words of Aristotle, the more you know you don't know. Now, imposter syndrome can be used as a competitive advantage. To do so, you must first admit if you don't have all the answers, that does not make you a fraud. It's okay. As a matter of fact, it makes you and defines you as a leader they can trust, as together we can solve problems more efficiently, creatively, and collaboratively together. In other words, see yourself and your team as human. Imposter syndrome is associated with behaviors like perfectionism and overworking. Sure, it's great to have high standards and be detail-oriented, but no one wins when your entire team is burnt out or you're micromanaging and burning yourself out. What example are you giving them? Next, in order to create a competitive advantage, you're going to need a couple of things. The first, and by far the foundation of making this work, is empathy. The most effective leaders understand that good mental and physical health are key to performance, and they empower their teams to tend to their well-being. Employees need to feel that they are valued as a whole person with unique talents and goals, which is why empathy is the prime attitude of successful leaders. Teams thrive when individuals feel understood, validated, and connected to one another. As a leader, if you want to really elevate your skills, you must embrace the whole person perspective, in which leaders, teams, and organizations have a balance of work, health, family, and constructive communication. Now, this initiative has shown to drive innovation, employee engagement, and business results, but also the psychological resources that sustain high-performance leaders over time are in place. Next is about recognition. You must celebrate the wins of yourself as an individual and that of your team, especially the small ones. See, the lack of confidence is the catalyst to an ingrained imposter syndrome. Those wins increase confidence. When we focus more on what could be rather than what we did, change your vocabulary from what if to I did or how can. And when you do accomplish it, celebrate it, no matter how small those wins are. If it's different from you normally do, it changes the chemistry of your brain. It starts to associate that win with a habit. Confidence is when you subconsciously know what the outcome will be. Now, this knowledge only happens when you continuously provide evidence through action, like tying your shoe, riding a bike, driving a car. Once you've mastered it, you don't have to think about it. You already know when you do something what the outcome is. Now, one of the imposter syndrome types is second-guessing decisions. This just means that you're either a pessimist or just cautious. Not a bad way to be. However, if it creates analysis paralysis or decisions made out of fear and desperation, then that is a detriment to the team and to the role. But by gathering more information, filtering it through your mind as an instruction manual is a way to fine-tune the engine of leadership. You can change the evidence from emotional fear to the logical next steps. This will help you to be more confident in how you decide. Now, some examples of how to identify what to focus on. So I've identified imposter syndrome. What do I need to focus on to start making these changes? We need external evidence, and that starts with a 360 survey. This can give you a foundation of where you stand from your team and peers' point of view. Now, remember, even if you don't agree, it is their perception, of your actions or lack thereof that will determine if they can trust you enough to listen and follow you. Now, this instruction manual of where you need to adapt is how you can start to reduce your fear and improve the skill necessary. This is challenging your assumption to what you know, which forces you to act, what you don't know, and what impact is that having on the team and the organization. Another way to turn your imposter syndrome into an advantage is the environment you create for yourself and as a team. Most imposter syndrome happens due to that person assuming they are the only ones having to deal with these feelings and fears, doubts, and anxiety, adding fuel to that negative energy. By creating a space for candid conversations where people feel comfortable speaking out without fear or being attacked as incompetent, you can show them that first, that they're not alone and that we can support each other through this. Start by setting some ground rules. No interruptions. When someone is vulnerable, interruption can create a negative response. Giving everyone equal time to speak, and everyone understands this, and acknowledging not only mistakes, but wins and opportunities to develop, going back to celebrating those small wins. By incorporating a place of communication that everyone is heard and not judged, will reduce the imposter syndrome and improve overall collaboration and individual confidence. As a leader, if you provide the example of using emotional intelligence with everyone, then your team will emulate it in this space. Be consistent in this space with the time, the standards that they uphold, and the conduct that you expect from each other. As an executive team, you guys should set guidelines for how team members must communicate with each other and define acceptable and unacceptable behaviors as part of the KPIs. We call those environmental KPIs. Leaders should actively encourage all team members to speak up without fear of consequence. This is going to foster honesty, debate, and better decisions. The main focus here, guys, is to build confidence in yourself and then in your team through the entire environment, communication, support, and appreciation. Imposter syndrome affects us all. And as leaders, we can work to reframe that into positive characteristics that create a stronger, more well-rounded team and leaders for the future in the workplace. We rise by lifting others, And I cannot think of an area where lifting each other is more important and more needed than here with imposter syndrome. Thank you for listening. If this was of value, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, or even leave a comment. We don't sell anything here, so the only ask that we have is that you share this with others. You never know by sharing with others what that new gen leader, that new supervisor or direct report may hear something here that would improve their lives, their careers, and their outcome and results. I look forward to hearing your next one. Till then, have a great day.